Right-wing judges are now aggressively coming out against the will of the American people. This story in Newsweek is infuriating. A South Dakota judge overturned a voter-approved constitutional amendment to legalize marijuana on Monday. Wow. Amendment A would have legalized marijuana for recreational use and was approved by over 54% of South Dakota voters last November. Republican Governor Kristi Noem, a close ally of former President Donald Trump, opposed the legalization effort and moved to reject the amendment after it passed, arguing that it should be overturned on technical grounds. Circuit Judge Christina Klinger, who was appointed by Noem in 2019, agreed with the governor and invalidated the amendment late Monday afternoon. Klinger's ruling asserted that the amendment dealt with more than one issue and was therefore a revision of the state's constitution rather than an amendment. Okay, so there's a lot to say about this, even on the legal side, not necessarily on the substance side, the policy side. I think this is a Weasley argument when they could have had the same result by not using a Weasley argument, but they did the thing that gives us a terrible result, and they used a Weasley argument. So the Weasley argument is they're arguing, well, something, the state constitution is the problem here, and that doesn't allow us to do it. The sense I get from reading everything on this is that's simply not true, that the vote should stand, and that is an effective argument on the side of the people, that 54% of South Dakota voters approved it, and that should stand. Here's the thing, though, and I know people are not going to want to hear this, but I'm giving you, from a legal perspective, the truth of the matter. If the court in South Dakota said, I'm striking this down, and I'm striking this down because of the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution and federal law overrides state law, and that's just the way it works, then that actually would have been totally legitimate. So in other words, it's right from a legal perspective, it's right from a constitutional perspective, even though it's the wrong side of the policy issue, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the overwhelming majority of people in the country and a small majority of people in South Dakota. So you understand why that's the case? It's actually really important that people get this. The way it works with the U.S. Constitution is we have the supremacy clause, which basically says when there's a conflict between state law and federal law wins. Federal law overrides state law. There's a very good reason for that. And if you think historically, more often than not, the federal government ends up being on the better side of these disputes. Not always, but most of the time it does. I mean, the best example of it is they were using the states' rights arguments all the time during the civil rights era, where states would say, no, the federal government doesn't have a right to come into our deep South state and say, no more segregation. We think we are free to do whatever we want in our state, including segregate, so the federal government can piss off. And the federal government responds and says, it doesn't matter what you think at the state level. We are the federal government. The law is you must desegregate, so now we're going to make you desegregate. And our law is the supreme law of the land. Federal law overrides state law. And in that instance, everybody would say, well, of course. You can't let the states do whatever they want if it's like segregation, right? And there's a number of examples, with this same idea in mind. There was a famous case in one of the border states, I think it was Arizona, but don't quote me on that they were saying, hey, we're going to do our own border policy. So on our border with Mexico, we're going to build our own wall and do our own policy. And the federal government stepped in and said, you actually can't do that. Because the border we have federal laws that apply to that, and our laws override your laws. So you can't do that, it's on us. And again, in that instance, what would you say? You'd probably say the same thing I would say, which is the federal government is correct. That they do have supremacy. So it is what it is. Now, the problem is, of course, there are instances where it does work in the other direction, where the states are taking the more progressive position and the federal government is not. Marijuana just happens to be one of those issues where it's still illegal under federal law. It's still a Schedule I drug. They could still crack down and lock people up over it. But we have so many states now where it's legal at the state level. It's legal in California, legal in, wherever you fill in the blank. There's so many of them now. And The only reason that they're allowed to have these booming industries in these states is because the federal government is just being kind enough to let it continue, even though they're technically still breaking the law. So if they wanted to, they have the legal authority. The federal government has the legal authority to go in there and shut down all the medical marijuana and the legal recreational marijuana all around the country, because it's still illegal under federal law. So, and the whole point of me giving you the ins and outs and the legal angle of this is to say this. The fight is never done unless and until we actually get the laws right at the federal level. Joe Biden could today effectively legalize marijuana, or at least decriminalize it all around the country. He just has to remove it from as a Schedule I substance and take it off the list completely, or just make it a lower category. That's it. That's all he'd have to do. But until he does that, it's still technically illegal, and we're just allowing the states to continue to break federal law. So anyway, now to come full circle to South Dakota here, the argument they're using is Weasley bullshit, because they're saying, I don't know, this direct initiative, which went the way we don't like, we're going to say it's unconstitutional under the state constitution. That's nonsense. Nonsense. But they would have been correct if they said, hey, the federal government doesn't allow this, so that's why we're slapping it down. That would have been true, and that would have been fair. So, but they have to change the law at the federal level. You could do it a number of ways. Like I said, Joe Biden could do it tomorrow. If Joe Biden's not going to do it tomorrow, make Joe Biden do it. And pass a bill in the House to decriminalize or legalize marijuana. They should do legalization, but if you want to do baby steps, hey, I get it, then do the decriminalization. That'll pass. And by the way, they're proposing something. And then we'll see what happens in the Senate. Maybe you even get it through the Senate. You might have the votes, man. If you can hold every Democrat, and then, of course, you get like Rand Paul and a handful of Republicans to flip. I mean, I don't know if you can get 60, but you might be able to get close. So we got to change the federal laws. And until we do that, we're just, fucking around at the state level here. And the federal law is always going to override state law. So it's a shame. I wish the South Dakota judge did not do this Weasley ruling. I wish the federal government and the state government both were like, you know what, go ahead. We see what the people want. We're going to take a hands-off approach. That's not what happened. So now we just need more action at a higher level, namely at the federal level. Legalize it or decriminalize it everywhere.